Good afternoon. You're watching Sky News today, and we start this hour with breaking news from the US to begin with. The reports that Kamala Harris has chosen Tim Walz, who is the governor of Minnesota, to be her candidate for vice president in the election, the running mate for Kamala Harris, who, of course, was in that role during the last election. We're going to cross now to our US correspondent, James Matthews, who is in Florida for us at the moment. James, a bit of a surprise, this one. We weren't expecting it to be him.
Yeah, you know what, Matt? Latterly, Tim Walz was a strong candidate. Initially, he was nowhere, and there were other higher-profile individuals who were thought to be front and centre of Kamala Harris's thinking. But Tim Walz, age 60, governor of Minnesota, former National Guardsman, former representative in the House on Capitol Hill, he impressed those within the Democratic Party, and clearly Kamala Harris, with his approach to debating, to discussing, to framing the presidential contest. He is the individual who coined the term weird that is getting so much traction in terms of the Democratic attacks on Donald Trump and J.D. Vance. In interview, he was a good performer. He has that folksy charm. He's relatable, has that carefree air of somebody who is in their advanced years. He's an individual, I suppose, who may not be in contention for the top job ultimately. Perhaps that was factored into Kamala Harris's thinking. But in terms of that selection process, there were others front and center. Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, Senator Mark Kelly in Arizona. They were touted initially as front-runners, but Tim Walz came up on the inside. There was a weekend process of so-called chemistry tests. Tim Walz and others sat down with Kamala Harris so that she could gauge who she could best do business with in office over 4 to 8 years. And I'm led to believe that Kamala Harris was hugely impressed by Tim Walz, as was her vetting team, a team essentially of lawyers and party acolytes who looked into the background of those who were in the running, checking for any skeletons in the closet and so on. And we're led to believe that Tim Walz absolutely smashed it in terms of just how he engaged with those who were carrying out the checks for Kamala Harris, and smashed it with Kamala Harris herself. So it's been a late decision. I mean, it's been reported by AP and Reuters that it's Tim Walz, but Kamala Harris is said to have slept on it overnight. We will now see the big running mate reveal, a whole raft of digital videos and so on lined up for the social media launch. And today, here in Philadelphia, we will see the two Democratic candidates, the would-be president and would-be vice president, the vice president picking her vice president. We'll see them on stage together in Philadelphia for the big introduction.
James, just one more very quick question, because there were those Democrats who consider themselves progressive who would have liked to have seen an all-female ticket, others who would have liked to have seen someone like Pete Buttigieg be partnering Kamala Harris as well. So what does Walz deliver in terms of votes? Because, again, Shapiro, being Pennsylvanian, could have made a big difference in a swing state like that.
Yeah, there were strengths to all the candidates. I think in terms of Pete Buttigieg, Transportation Secretary, he's a gay man. In terms of another female on the ticket, perhaps the view would be that, OK, you've got Kamala Harris, the first black woman to run for the presidency. Perhaps making history in American politics has to come one step at a time. She already is a historic first. Perhaps it's too big of a reach for America at large to embrace the prospect of an all-female ticket and black woman plus gay man ticket. It's all about balance in terms of what works, in terms of the overall. You mentioned Josh Shapiro. You're right in terms of him being in Pennsylvania, being a winner. 61% approval rating in that state, a must-win state. They say here you have to win Pennsylvania to win the election, and it's because of the numbers. That delivers 19 electoral votes, which is huge in terms of the final equation as to who gets into the White House. Interestingly, Shapiro will be making remarks, we are told, at this event today. I mean, it's been a fine calculation for Harris to discount the advantages of Shapiro on the ticket, the guarantee probably of those 19 electoral votes, for her to set that aside for the strengths of Tim Walz. That is a calculation on which her presidential run may turn. That may be the axis, the dividing line between success and failure. We'll find out in due course. Balancing the ticket has been the key thing. And there are questions about Tim Walz. I mean, he is somebody who leans left, he leans progressive. The problem for Kamala Harris in some parts of this country will be that she is viewed as a San Francisco liberal. So there had been an expectation that she would be looking for somebody more moderate in terms of the politics to reach those parts of America that will be turned off by the liberalism attached to Kamala Harris. But she's gone for Tim Walz. He has strengths. He's the mature, heterosexual white man. That will work in terms of balance in some parts of this country. And generally, he's a good performer. We've seen that in the media. He's coined this term weird. That's played well so far. I suppose the Democratic thinking is that that will play well over the course of the next 3 months, in debates in particular, with the likes of, J.D. Vance. He's actually in town today, Matt. The way the Republicans are playing it is that in this week, when Harris and now Walz will go on tour of swing states, J.D. Vance and Republicans are going to the same places several hours earlier. It's almost a kind of match-up. But what we have now is the election starting proper. We now know the identities of the ticket on one side and the two names on the ticket on the other. So in many ways, the election starts right here in Philadelphia today.
Really does, James. Thank you very much indeed. We can speak now to former advisor to Nancy Pelosi, Michael Yaki, who joins me now. Michael, thanks so much for taking the time. Your reaction to Kamala Harris's pick for running mate?
Well, one of the maxims in selecting the vice presidential candidate is do no harm. And I think that Tim Walz exemplifies the do no harm. There was a very concerted campaign, very public campaign against Josh Shapiro. I think that was probably one of the tipping points to go toward Walz. Walz is someone who's a governor. He came from a very Republican district when he was in the House of Representatives. He's someone who, as your colleague mentioned, has a sort of folksy charm. This is, to coin a phrase, this is not a weird choice by Kamala. It's a very safe choice. And I think that what they're banking on is that Josh Shapiro will continue to anchor in Pennsylvania and work on the now Harris-Walz ticket to solidify that state, and hopefully use Walz's sort of folksy homespun charm, the fact that he was in the National Guard for 20 years, one of the few members of Congress who was ever retired as an enlisted, not versus a commissioned, West Point kind of officer, someone who has the ability to talk to the other side of the aisle, and hopefully that sort of maturity. And it's funny, he's only a few years older than the vice president, but he projects an aura of sort of the granddad or the dad. And I think that what we'll be seeing is using him in the Rust Belt, in the Northeast, to make sure that they make sure they can solidify the gains they've been making so far in Michigan, Pennsylvania, and other places. So a safe choice. Kind of interesting because no one had heard of Tim Walz until a few weeks ago when he went on Sunday Talk Show and called Trump and Vance weird. But stranger things have happened. And again, the maxim is do no harm. I think Tim Walz is a very safe do no harm choice.
Talking about how he complements Kamala Harris, Michael, hearing you say that, it is reminiscent of how Biden complimented Obama as his running mate.
Right. There is sort of this, we want someone who projects the air of someone who's been steady. But here, this is a governor. Biden had 30 years of being in the Senate, 30 years of statesmanship. Walz hasn't been tested quite the same way, but he brings a different kind of background. Again, 24 years in the National Guard, someone who understands and talks about to enlisted men, and that's really what you're going to be finding in the rural areas of Pennsylvania, in Michigan, Wisconsin, other places, because he can talk that language. He was a school teacher, so that's going to be good in terms of his ability to relate to sort of the everyday American kind of role model that they're looking for in this. Shapiro, I mean, I think there was certainly a lot of appeal to Josh Shapiro, but I think in the end, the idea that you have this sort of folksy stability anchoring him, and even if he is turned progressive, it's certainly not. It certainly doesn't show in his voting record when he was in his campaigns when he was in the House of Representatives. Okay. He won a Republican district, and he kept it for 5 terms.
Michael, let's compare the two vice presidential candidates then, because in terms of the weaknesses that Walz may have, he is evidently an older white man, whereas J.D. Vance is, well, significantly younger than Donald Trump, some 30-odd years as well. Clearly huge intellect and very keen to use it when he opens his mouth. I mean, are they going to come head-to-head at some point?
You know, they might have a debate, and if they do, it might. Look, we had a very similar kind of situation when you had Paul Ryan from Wisconsin, younger, former House Speaker, running against Joe Biden. And a lot of people were concerned that Biden was going to get chewed up by the younger, very smart Paul Ryan. And in the end, the statesman, the older gent, the idea of stability won out very easily in those debates. So I wouldn't put any money on against Tim Walz if he's going into a debate with J.D. Vance. And J.D. Vance certainly has stepped in it a few times already with his comments about childless cat ladies and things like that. So it's going to be interesting. I don't think anyone can dismiss Walz's ability to hold his own, but I think one of the weaknesses that people are concerned about, and what Shapiro certainly exemplified, was sort of the barn burner attack dog, right? There was no doubt that if you wanted someone out there hitting hard, being funny, being genuinely impassioned, Josh Shapiro had that all the way to the bank. No one's quite sure about Tim Walz. They know he's kind of funny. They know he can turn a phrase, but can he take on the traditional role of the vice president, which is to be on the attack and on the attack against J.D. Vance and then the attack against Donald Trump?